Part 11. My ultimate goal is to get Qiutai into the palace. Although sex will no longer have any effect on walking, last night's love was too intense. So that after Pu Qiutai finished washing and changing, his waist and legs were still a little sore, but fortunately, after a hearty breakfast, he was basically able to move freely. Couldn't wait to leave the heart cultivation palace. He really couldn't help but tell everyone the good news. Literary prison has always been the sharpest and most frightening knife hanging over the heads of literati. After Xia Linxuan destroyed Daqing, this knife was never raised. And he finally raised it yesterday, and the court also looked turbulent because of this. Now, he is going to tell his worried colleagues, this knife, the emperor has put down. It's nice to see Master Pu's appearance. Xiao Beiji, who followed Xia Linxuan to the Qiankun palace, looked at the direction where Pu Qiutai disappeared, and couldn't help but sigh. Yes. He's definitely happy. The corners of Xia Linxuan's mouth turned up slightly. I have turned a big matter into a small matter. And he is not ready to take this opportunity to make a big deal about literary prison. How can he be unhappy? I'm afraid I'm going to rush back to the Hanlin Pavilion to tell each other at this time. A word woke up the dreamer. Xiao Beiji's smile froze on his face, and he said, the emperor. Your Majesty, you can't let Master Pu talk about it everywhere, Your Majesty. The emperor hasn't made an order yet. How does Master Pu know? This, once asked. He can't say it clearly, even if he can make up a reason. I'm afraid that some people will secretly doubt the relationship between the emperor and the adult. Xiao Beiji hurriedly finished speaking. But seeing the smile on the corner of Xia Linxuan's mouth getting bigger and bigger, he suddenly understood, and couldn't help but be surprised. Could it be? Could it be that the emperor has known for a long time, but you? Why don't you remind Master Pu? Could it be? It was the emperor who deliberately did not remind Master Pu of the. Naturally, I deliberately didn't remind him. Xia Linxuan smiled slightly. If he was reminded, how could he lose his mind under excitement and give people room for suspicion? If there is no suspicion, where will there be rumors? Shen Chaoqing, Chan Yanan and others couldn't comprehend my intentions, or in other words, they pretended not to understand it even if they did, so that few people knew about this matter until now. Then I can only rely on rumors to tell the world about the relationship between me and Qiutai. But the emperor, this is the emperor's strict order not to spread the word, if nothing else. Just say that the harem concubines, I'm afraid they are all kept in the dark now. Speaking of this, Xia Linxuan couldn't help but nodded, glanced appreciatively at the eunuch standing beside him, and then looked at the scenery outside Long Yuan, and said in a deep voice, Xiao Beiji, you have done a good job in this matter. I am very pleased. The heart cultivation palace is my dormitory. And no one is allowed to eat inside and outside. This time, I also deliberately tempted. And these minions you trained finally did not disappoint me. Xiao Beiji hurriedly thanked Xia Linxuan for his appreciation, and then hesitated. But the emperor, you. Now you have to tell the world again, so that sooner or later, the harem will not be able to hide it. Xia Linxuan waved his hand, interrupted his words, and said lightly, originally, I was afraid that those women would think of some selfish means to use my mother forces to frame Qiutai in the court. Now I am not afraid. I have received the news that the operation to spread the net to the south has achieved some results. So, when he said this, he suddenly stopped, looked at Xiao Beiji with a solemn face and said, Xiao Beiji, everyone says that you are the best at figuring out what you want, so can you guess what I want most now? Xiao Beiji was so frightened that he knelt down with a plop and kowtowed vigorously. Your Majesty, the slave should die, the slave should die. What the hell? I don't blame you, and it is necessary to figure out what I want. As long as I don't have any unsightly thoughts. Then, you can clearly know what I like and what I want. Wouldn't that make me more at ease? Otherwise, do you think that among so many minions? Why did I let you serve you closely? Is it because of your love for me? When have you ever seen me miss my old feelings so much? Xiao Beiji breathed a sigh of relief, wiped the sweat on his head, and said with a smile, the emperor is wise, and the slave figure out the emperor's preferences, and they really don't have the slightest selfishness. Otherwise they would rather have 5 thunders in the sky. Before the words fell, Xia Linxuan waved his hand impatiently. Okay, don't talk nonsense, come. Let's talk about it. Can you guess what I want? Xiao Beiji pondered for a while, carefully recalling everything after Xia Linxuan and Pu Qiutai met, and suddenly, an answer jumped into his mind, only to make him tremble. Looking at Xia Linxuan in disbelief, he muttered, Your Majesty, it's the slave who made a mistake. It must be a slave who guessed wrong. Impossible. How is this possible? Oh, listen. I think you're probably right. Xia Linxuan smiled slightly, with a determined look on his face. He was still very confident in the wisdom of the clever eunuch beside him. Xiao Beiji swallowed 2 mouthfuls of saliva, thought about it, and then quietly walked to Xia Linxuan's side, and said uncertainty in a voice smaller than a mosquito humming, that, Your Majesty, could it be that you want Master Pu to enter the palace, right? The last 3 words are extremely difficult to say, and until now, Xiao Beiji still feels that he must have a bad brain to say such an outrageous guess. Unexpectedly, Xia Linxuan laughed, then slapped him on the head, and shouted, Okay, good. I really deserve to be the head of my house, and I guessed it all at once, yes. I will reward you with a few good things when I go down to the court later. Xiao Beiji hurriedly knelt down to thank him, but his heart was already turning up a monstrous wave. He kept wiping the sweat on his forehead with his sleeves, and secretly guessed that the emperor was. It was really to let Master Pu enter the palace to accompany him, but it's just that in order to keep this bottom line, Master Pu has clearly said that he would rather burn all the jade, and the emperor will. What can the emperor do to let Master Pu enter the palace? Unexpectedly, the sentence that Xia Linxuan said just now jumped out of his mind. The net operation in the south? What is that? Could it be? As soon as he thought of this, Xiao Beiji couldn't help but suddenly realize, looking at the high 95 honor, he had a few helpless feelings in his heart. It seems that in order to let Master Pu enter the palace, the emperor is really painstaking. Long Yuan slowly stopped, and in front of him was the Qiankun Palace. The case of Baishan collection is raised high and gently put down like this, which will definitely cause dissatisfaction among the old ministers of the famous dynasty, but this is not on Xia Linxuan's heart at all. Looking at the gorgeous morning sun on the horizon, the young king knew very well for himself, the real test was that after 2 or 3 months, he wanted Pu Qiutai, who was cold and arrogant and adhered to the last bottom line, to enter the palace as a concubine willingly. Will it be possible? You don't see the white waves sweeping the sky, and you're afraid that the boat will be late to turn around. The world is infinitely turbulent and bitter, and it is known that it is lost in the Mandarin Lake fishing. Chan Yanan wore a light luo cloak, sat on the couch in front of the window and muttered the last 4 sentences of Pu Qiutai's Mandarin Lake song, shook his head with a wry smile, and muttered to himself, Qiutai is right. Fame and fortune, long-term companion emperor's side. How beautiful it looks, but in the end, who can predict the blessings and misfortunes? If I hadn't been too greedy that day, I would not have entered this officialdom, and I would not have had the disaster I have today. The Lord is wrong. Suddenly, a pleasant voice sounded beside him. Chan Yanan looked back and saw that it was his favorite Mrs. Xie, so he took her hand and sat on the couch, and asked astringently, "What's wrong? If it weren't for my greed, I wouldn't have been able to get you to suffer with me." Xie Ruyu smiled and said, "Why don't you want to think about it, master? If you weren't the official, how would the emperor know about you? How can I rely on you? Now that you are a former disciple of Han Baishan, you can still escape with your life. This is the emperor's grace, those scholars who have not been famous. How many heads will they lose this time? If you don't have a career, you will be one of them." Chan Yanan was stunned for a moment. He came to his senses, and sighed. "That's right. If I hadn't been a famous courtier, I would have been the same as those scholars who were waiting for the death penalty, so my end would be pretty good?" Xie Ruyu smiled and said, "Naturally. It's good. What's more, the emperor also asked the master to question, and he didn't put you in prison or demote your official position. Isn't this bad?" On the Han family's side, the concubine knew that the master was sad, but at this time, the master should be wise enough to protect himself and not fall into the well, and he was already worthy of the Han family. Chan Yanan nodded, thought for a while, and then smiled bitterly. "Although my life has been saved, my official position may not be demoted, even if the emperor does not demote my officials now. Do you think those famous old ministers will not take this opportunity to fall into the trap for us? I estimate that it is certain to be demoted. But now I just don't know if I will be demoted to other provinces, and I am most afraid of going to Lingnan and other miasma places, and then I will suffer. And I will also affect you." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps outside, and then the voice of a small servant said, "Master Chan. Master Pu asks to see you." "Qiutai?" Chan Yanan was stunned for a moment, then stood up from the couch and shouted loudly, "Hurry, please hurry, invite him in. No, no, no. I will personally greet him. Ruyu, help me change my clothes." Xie Ruyu hurriedly picked up the clothes from the hanger and put them on for Chan Yanan, while curious. Is this Master Pu Qiutai who is famous all over the world for his poetry and articles? The concubine had also heard of him in his early years, and the Lord and him seemed to be friends. But after he entered Beijing, he didn't see any dealings with the Lord. Chan Yanan said while tying his belt, "What do you know? Qiutai is different from me. He is a true gentleman. And I am a real villain. He was forced to enter the office, where he still has the heart to socialize, and now he actually came to the door in person. It must have been the emperor who summoned him last night, and there was a new development in the Baishan case. Well, it's probably good progress. Otherwise he wouldn't have come to me in person." As he spoke, he had already rushed out excitedly. Here Xie Ruyu thought about it, and finally couldn't help but be curious, and came to the screen of the hall. It is said that Pu Qiutai is a handsome celebrity and talent, and she naturally wants to see this famous person. Sure enough, after a while, Chan Yanan personally welcomed Pu Qiutai to the house, and the two had obviously been talking outside for a while. At this time, after Chan Yanan ordered refreshments, he smiled and said, "So, the emperor intends not to pursue the Baishan case? That's great news." Pu Qiutai nodded and smiled. "Yes, the emperor personally said that the big thing has turned into a small matter. I think it shouldn't be wrong. The reason why I went to the house today is because I thought that maybe the Han family would send someone to contact Brother Chan. And I hope you will tell them at that time, so that they can rest assured, and please rest assured the Han family." Chan Yanan arched his hand to the north and sighed. The saint is really open-minded, and he didn't even pursue the charges of my teacher. Don't worry, I'll order someone to deliver letters everywhere. Oh, it's not proper. I'm afraid that the early dynasty hasn't dispersed at this time, so it's better to wait for the early dynasty to disperse, and then I will order someone to go to Master Shen to inquire clearly, and then send someone to deliver the letter. A sneer appeared at the corner of Pu Qiutai's mouth. In this regard, he really despised Chan Yanan, for fear of being implicated. He didn't even want the title of teacher and student, and called him Han Baishan. But now as soon as he heard that Xia Linxuan would not pursue it, he immediately became a teacher again. However, he is a kind person. Chan Yanan was ridiculed by Honglian yesterday in his place. He was afraid that his expression would panic when the other party saw it. So he picked up the teacup and drank tea to cover it up. Qiutai, did you come to me when you got the news? Chan Yanan suddenly remembered something, and couldn't help but look at Pu Qiutai suspiciously, but saw him shake his head and said, "No, I went to the Hanlin Academy to say a word first, and then I took leave with the head of the court, and came to tell you. The head of the house told me that you are sick today and leave at home." You went to the Hanlin Academy first? Chan Yanan's heart flipped over. How could the emperor secretly condone Qiutai to tell the news first? Isn't he afraid that everyone will guess the relationship between the two of them because of this? Wait a minute. Could it be? Did the emperor do this on purpose? He is no longer satisfied with this underground relationship with Qiutai? What's wrong? Pu Qiutai saw Chan Yanan's thoughtful look, and his heart couldn't help but rise, although he despised the other party, but he also knew very well in his heart, in terms of seeing things and guessing people's hearts, Chan Yanan is really much better than himself. Oh, nothing, that. I'm just asking by chance. Chan Yanan sighed, and secretly said, Qiutai. You are too simple. Abide by the way of a gentleman. Where will you be the emperor's opponent? You are noble and proud, but this time, I'm afraid I can't help you. Alas, what to do? If there are really rumors, I'm afraid Qiutai won't be able to stand it, right? Doesn't the emperor know this? If so, why would he do it? Is he really sure that he can use his family and fellow villagers to tie up the Qiutai? Chan Yanan was full of doubts and couldn't speak, and after talking for a while, Pu Qiutai said goodbye and left. And he stood in the room for a while, thinking about where the emperor's next move in this game of chess would fall, when he heard someone outside the door report, "Master, the eunuch is here, saying that it is the emperor's command." Chan Yanan hurriedly went out, and the eunuch looked at him and said with a smile, "Lord Chan, the emperor has ordered you to go to the north study to see the emperor immediately. The emperor said that the Baishan collection case has decided not to pursue it, and after you know the news, no matter what kind of illness you have, it will be cured without medicine." Chan Yanan smiled awkwardly, bowed down and said, yes, I'll change my clothes and go to see the emperor immediately. And my father-in-law will wait for me for a while. After speaking, he hurriedly returned to the back room, and couldn't help but think in his heart, the emperor of the secret path could never come to me for the Baishan case, so why did he call me over in such a hurry? Is it because of Qiutai? But I'm afraid that Qiutai looked down on me. Where will he listen to my advice? It is better for the emperor to find me than to find Master Shen. In the north study, Xia Linxuan stood in front of the window, looked at the verdant courtyard, and asked Xiao Beiji on the side casually, "Is there any news coming out? If you go back to the emperor, you haven't received it yet, but the slave guessed. I'm afraid it's soon." Xiao Beiji replied respectfully, but he heard Xia Linxuan sneer, shook his head and said, "Most of the people in the Hanlin Academy are nerds, counting on them to spread rumors, and it is not okay to have no patience." Xiao Beiji smiled. What the emperor said is true. It's just that most of the important ministers have always come out of the Hanlin Academy, so it can be seen that there are still a few smart people there, once it spreads. These nerds have nothing to do in the day, and they like to talk about other people's parents, so I'm afraid they can spark the prairie immediately. Xia Linxuan glanced at him and said with a smile, "What you said also has some truth. The people of the Hanlin Academy are not all stupid, but they don't have any scheming to be important ministers now. Do you know why those Jinshi entered the Hanlin Academy, and they have to put them on the place to exercise for a few years before reuse? It is to adapt them to the real way of officialdom." Xiao Beiji hurriedly nodded yes, thought about it and said carefully, "It's just that the slave really doesn't understands. What is the emperor doing when Lord Chan comes here at this time? He should have known about the relationship between the emperor and Lord Pu for a long time, but he didn't dare to spread it. Could it be that the emperor wanted to order him to?" Before he finished speaking, he was lightly kicked by Xia Linxuan, and he laughed. "What nonsense are you talking about? Am I such a bad person? Although Chan Yanan is a villain, I won't let him spread this kind of thing. He is also famous in Shilin. If he really does this kind of thing, will he be shameless in the future?" Xiao Beiji naturally knew this, but in this way, he didn't understand it even more. Why did the emperor let Chan Yanan come to see him when he got down to the court? Xia Linxuan glanced at him. Knowing what he was wondering about, he was in a good mood at this moment. And he didn't care about explaining a few words to his henchman eunuch. So, he slowly paced to the back of the dragon case, and laughed softly. "You have been smart and clever all day. Why have you become stupid now? Think about it, with Qiutai's temperament, can he accept this kind of rumor?" Xiao Beiji's heart moved, and an inspiration flashed in his head, but it was fleeting. He wanted to ask the emperor in detail with a cheeky face, but he listened to the report of the eunuch outside. Back to the emperor. "Lord Chan is here to meet you outside. Allow." Xia Linxuan didn't care about talking to Xiao Beiji, and when he saw Chan Yanan coming in, he asked Xiao Beiji to serve tea, and asked Chan Yanan to sit down next to him. Seeing that this guy only dared to sit on half of his ass, he smiled slightly and said lightly, "Chan Iching has also been an official in the Daqing court before. Do you know how many princes there were in the royal family back then?" Chan Yanan chuckled in his heart. The cold sweat on his forehead came down. He wanted to smile reluctantly, but at Xia Linxuan's burning gaze, he found that he couldn't laugh at all. Back to the emperor, the minister. The minister didn't know much about the situation back then but remembered that there seemed to be only 7 princes in the royal family that year, including the crown prince. When he said this, he couldn't help but wipe the cold sweat on his head with his sleeve, and the fear in his heart was like a monstrous wave. This is the past more than 3 years ago. How could the emperor bring it up again? At that time, all the concubines and princesses in the palace were slaughtered, and only a few escaped. One of which also rebuilt the Daqing Southern Dynasty with Zhongnan as the capital, but only lasted for half a year, and was destroyed and eliminated by the iron hooves of the daimyo. And the king of the Southern Dynasty was also in a different place that day. But I don't know why the emperor is bringing up the old things again today. Xia Linxuan quietly looked at Chan Yanan, who was in a cold sweat, and waited until he raised his sleeves for the 3rd time to wipe his sweat. Then he sneered and said lightly, "In this way, I killed 3 princes in the palace back then. And then Yunnan and Fujian arrested 2 princes who escaped from the palace and corrected the law on the spot. And the emperor of the Jinling Southern Dynasty who had been on the throne for half a year has also been executed. That is to say, the descendants of the Daqing royal family. Now there is only one person left, and that is the Prince Zhu Mingtang, isn't that so? Even if Chan Yanan is a real villain, and now he has become a famous courtier." But when he heard Xia Linxuan say that the royal family of the old dynasty had disappeared, and only one prince was left and now he didn't know where to go, He couldn't help but feel a pain in his heart. But he didn't dare to show this kind of regret on his face, so he had to hang his head and whisper, "Yes, Emperor." "Very good. Now that Zhu Mingtang is about to be caught." Xia Linxuan chuckled, leaned back on the back of the dragon chair, looked at Qian Yanan and said with a smile, "I'm thinking. When he is captured in Beijing, do you old courtiers go and watch him executed with your own eyes? Well, by the way, as well as his wife and children, if you see them being cut in half or torn apart, I'm afraid that your heart will completely cut ties with the old dynasty and be loyal to my daimyo empire, right?" The emperors. Qian Yanan knelt on the ground with a plop, trembling and speechless. He is a real villain. Yesterday in front of the emperor, for the sake of his life, he didn't even want Han Baishan and his own teacher-student status. This is a typical villain's behavior. However, even so, when he heard Xia Linxuan say such a cruel thing, he finally couldn't help it. The minister begged the emperor to open up the internet. And the minister. He didn't dare to say the rest of the words, but fortunately he was in a hurry at this moment, and suddenly remembered Pu Qiutai, and thought that the emperor gently put down the Baishan collection case just because of the other party's request, and a glimmer of hope suddenly rose in his heart. "Your Majesty, Master Pu still respects the old feelings. If the emperor lets him see this scene, I'm afraid he won't be able to stand it." Qian Yanan touched the ground with his forehead and said cautiously, his fists clenched tightly, and his palms were full of cold sweat. "He can't stand it. So you can stand it?" Xia Linxuan chuckled, and Qian Yanan was speechless with one sentence. "Okay, you go out. Well, don't spread this matter for the time being, but Qiutai is there. You might as well try his attitude for me." Xia Linxuan stood up, looked at Qian Yanan with burning eyes, and said in a deep voice, "Do you understand what I mean?" "Yes, the minister understands." The minister will go. How dare Qian Yanan speculate about the emperor's intentions in doing this? He only knew that he was going to find Pu Qiutai and asked him to beg the emperor again. The prince of the old dynasty is probably down the streets now, if he cannot kill them all. He still hopes that Pu Qiutai can save that person's life, even if he can leave a vein of blood for the Daqing royal family. It wasn't until he left the palace gate, on the way to Hanlin courtyard, that without the coercion exerted by Xia Linxuan, Qian Yanan suddenly woke up, and secretly said that something is wrong. "This matter is not right. The emperor deliberately looked for me. Shouldn't it be just to test my attitude? Could it be that the emperor deliberately wanted to reveal this matter to Qiutai through my mouth?" He stopped, pondered what Xia Linxuan had just said to him, and made sure that the emperor's last sentence was indeed to ask him to tell Pu Qiutai about this matter. Thinking that this was the emperor's intention to summon him. It's just that. Why is that? The emperor knew how deep Pu Qiutai was for his homeland and the royal family of the Qing dynasty. Could it be that the emperor still wants to use this to blackmail him? But family members, folks, and the Baishan case, aren't these laws enough? Why did the emperor add this matter? A flash of inspiration suddenly flashed in his mind, and he thought that this morning he was still wondering why the emperor deliberately let Pu Qiutai create rumors. And he knew that the other party couldn't bear this kind of consequence. Now, the answer seems to be on the horizon. Thinking of this, Qian Yanan's body couldn't help but shudder, and secretly said yes, no wonder the emperor still wants to add this chip. With this chip in hand, even if he is drowned out by rumors, he is afraid that Qiutai will not dare to seek death. With a long sigh, Qian Yanan couldn't help but shake his head and muttered, "The emperor is really painstaking about Qiutai. It's just that this step by step, when and how far will he be forced? Do you want him to enter the palace as a concubine? How is this possible?" Although he felt that it was impossible, Qian Yanan's fear of Xia Linxuan in his heart had increased greatly. Just looking at the arrangements of these few steps, he was not optimistic about Pu Qiutai's prospects. If the emperor really made up his mind to let Pu Qiutai enter the palace, I am afraid that he would have prepared the biggest bargaining chip a long time ago, right? The emperor is really wise. It turns out that you have been ready for a long time. And you want Lord Chan to disclose this news to Lord Pu, so that even if the rumors are overwhelming, in order to save the prince's life, Lord Pu may not dare to act rashly. Xia Linxuan looked at the flattering Xiao Beiji, and sneered, "You kid is clever. But my ultimate goal is to get Qiutai into the palace." Xiao Beiji said softly, "Your Majesty, forgive the slave for being blunt. Master Pu said that this is his final bottom line. I'm afraid that even if he is the prince of the old dynasty, this weight is still a little light." Without waiting to finish speaking, he saw Xia Linxuan looking at him, shook his head and said, "What do you know? You don't know how deep Qiutai feelings for his homeland has. He has always thought that Emperor Jing Ren has the grace of knowing him, but he has never repaid him. If it weren't for this, it would not be easy for me to pinch him. The prince of the old dynasty? If you want to let Qiutai enter the palace, of course. It will not be as simple as just a prince. You kid will wait and see what I do." Xiao Beiji saw that Xia Linxuan seemed to be in a good mood, so he boldly said, "The slave that the emperor said also understand, but just now, Lord Chan seems to be nostalgic for the old dynasty. Why is the emperor not annoyed at all? Forget it, Master Pu. That Lord Chan is a real villain." Without waiting to finish speaking, he heard Xia Linxuan laugh and said, "Annoyed? Why should I be annoyed? It's just a common problem for their nerds. No matter how villain Qian Yanan is, after all, he is not even a subordinate who does not even want courtesy, righteousness and shame at all. Otherwise can I tolerate him? What's more, think about it. That Qian Yanan didn't even want the title of teacher and student yesterday in order not to be implicated, but now he is revealing his true feelings for the prince of the old dynasty. Even he is like this, not to mention Qiutai who values love and righteousness. Hey, this move of mine is a nirvana. Qiutai, that nerd, he can't resist." When he said this, he stretched out a hand, slowly gathered his 5 fingers into a fist, and laughed deeply. "I want him to walk into my body step by step. And he will never be able to turn over." Xiao Beiji looked at his master's imperative expression, and really wanted to ask, "Your Majesty, are you so obsessed with Master Pu because you like him? Or because you want to conquer him?" However, he inspired himself in his heart for a long time, but he still didn't have the courage to ask such a bad question, and he wanted to know, how could the emperor fall in love with Master Pu? It's purely a man's desire to conquer.